Hello everyone, welcome to today's video on adding integers. We're going to look at adding integers using three methods with the DIRT model, which I introduced when we talked about opposite summing to zero, using number lines, and then with absolute values, kind of rules and shortcuts. So the first one we're going to start really simple, which is 1 plus 2. But we're really looking at how do you add integers when they are both positive, just to kind of ground our models and build on what you already know. Okay, so 1 plus 2 is what? Yeah, 1 plus 2 is 3. Great. Okay, let's figure out why 1 plus 2 is 3. So first we're going to look at the DIRT model, which also brings us into the idea of a vertical number line. If you have a pile of dirt, like on top of grass, then that's going to be what we consider a positive number. And then if you have a hole in the ground, so you're going below ground and creating a hole, the hole is going to represent a negative number. So here I have a pile of dirt that is like 1 foot or 1 unit high. And then I have a pile of dirt that's 2 feet high. Okay, and when we're told what is 1 plus 2, they're saying what happens when we combine this pile of dirt that's 1 feet high with this pile of dirt that's 2 feet high. I can do that pretty easily. I put the 1, and we get right here to the number 3. Right, so now I have a pile of dirt that's 3 feet or 3 units high. So that's a way to think about it. And now we're going to look at the horizontal number line. Okay, so we want to represent 1. So 1 is going to be an arrow that starts at 0 and goes to 1. And then I need to add 2. So that would look like an arrow that starts at 0 and goes to positive 2. And then if I'm going to add those together, I'm going to connect the heads and the tails. And I'm going to end up right here at 3. I end up at 3, which is why my answer to 1 plus 2 is 3. And then lastly, let's look at the absolute value shortcut. Okay, so an important rule for adding rational numbers in general and including integers is when you're adding these numbers with the same sign, both 1 and 2, they're both positive. Okay, that's what I mean by the same sign. Then what we do is we can add the absolute values of the number and keep that sign, whether it's positive or negative. So in a case where this is both positive, it's going to feel like we're doing too much work, which is the point, because I want you to see what you already know and then see how that extends. Okay, so in this situation, we're going to have to add the absolute values of the numbers we have. Okay, so we're going to do the absolute value of 1 plus the absolute value of 2. Let's figure that out first. Absolute value of 1 is 1, and the absolute value of 2 is 2, because the absolute value is just our distance from 0. It's always going to be a positive number. Okay, so what's 1 plus 2? That is equal to 3. Okay, so that means, of course, then that 1 plus 2 is equal to 3. And here we kept the sign. Since 1 and 2 were both positive, then our number ends up staying positive. Okay, so of course you know how to do what 1 plus 2 is, but this is various ways that we can represent that, and these are going to be important as now we go into working with negative numbers. Alright, so now let's look at example 2, where we're going to be adding two negative integers. So now instead of adding 1 plus 2, we're going to be adding negative 1 plus negative 2. Alright, so for negative 1 plus negative 2 on my DIRT model, here I have my two holes in the ground for negative 1 and negative 2. So negative 1 is going to be a hole in the ground that goes like 1 unit or 1 foot deep. And then we have negative 2, which is going to be a hole in the ground that goes down to negative 2, or we can think of it as a hole that's like 2 units or 2 feet deep. All right, and then if we want to add these two holes, we want to combine them together, well, then I'm just gonna drag my other hole that's 2 feet deep underneath it. Yeah, when I do that, I end up down here at negative 3. Right, so now I have a hole that's 3 feet or 3 units deep. So that's what happened when I added the negative 1 plus negative 2. I'm going to get negative 3. So I can represent negative 1 as an arrow starting at 0 that goes down to negative 1. Okay, and then I could represent negative 2. An arrow starts at 0 and goes down 2. And what am I going to do when I add them together? I'm going to connect them. So first I'm at negative 1, and then I go 2 down from there. You end up at negative 3. Okay, we often see these represented on a horizontal number line. So again, I have my negative 1, This would be negative 2. So I'm going to connect it. I go to negative 1, then I add negative 2. And where do I end up? Again, I end up at negative 3, which is why that's my sum, the answer to my addition problem. All right, so now we start getting into these absolute value shortcuts and when this matters more. When adding numbers, rational numbers, integers with the same sign, meaning they're both positive or they're both negative, then what we do is we add the absolute values of the numbers and keep the sign. All right, so we can set that up. The absolute value of negative 1 plus the absolute value of negative 2. Let's figure out what that is first. The absolute value of negative 1 is positive 1. The absolute value of negative 2 is positive 2. Again, distance from 0. And 1 plus 2 is 3. But since these were both negative, that means then that negative 1 plus negative 2 is equal to negative 3. Okay, so that's how we could get it without a number line. I want to talk about why we're talking about absolute values for a moment. So the reason absolute values are coming up is, again, absolute values means your distance from 0. So when we have numbers from the same sign, if we look at this number line, this arrow, we're talking about our distance away from 0 is 1. And then for this one, this was negative 2. Negative 2 means my distance away from 0 is 2. And then since I'm going in the same direction, they're both going in the negative direction, I just need to add those distances together. And I get 3 away from 0. So it becomes a negative 3. Right, so that's where the absolute value comes up. What's the harder situation is when we're adding one negative number and one positive number. So that's what we're going to do next. Okay, now we have example 3, which again, we're going to be adding one positive and one negative integer. Doesn't matter if the negative number is first or the positive number is first, we're going to be doing the same kind of concept. Again, we'll start with our dirt model. So I have negative 1 plus 2. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up my 2. First, I'm going to fill in my hole, negative 1. And then when I do that, I both fill in my hole, I get to 0, and then I have extra leftover dirt, which ultimately results in a pile of dirt that's just 1 foot high, right? 1 foot above the earth. Okay, so that's going to be our solution. Negative 1 plus 2 is going to be positive 1. All right, so now let's think about that on our number lines. So on a number line, I had this arrow that was negative 1. It starts at 0 and it goes down to negative 1. And then I had positive 2. It started at 0, went up to positive 2. And now I need to combine them. So that means I have negative 1 first. I go down to negative 1. From there, at negative 1, I need to connect the tail to my head. And now from negative 1, I'm going to go up 2 spots, right? Because that's what plus 2 means. I'm going to go up 2. And that's going to make me end up at positive 1. All right, let's show that again on the horizontal number line so that becomes a little clearer. Again, I'm going to start with representing negative 1. We represent negative 1 with an arrow starting at 0, going to negative 1. And then I need to add 2. Okay, well, positive 2 is going to be 2 units, starts at 0, goes to 2. But when I combine them then, what I need to do is I need to go to negative 1. And from that negative 1, I move 2 to the right. So I bring my arrow there, 2 to the right. And again, where am I ending up? At positive 1, meaning like in my dirt model, I have a pile of dirt that's like 1 unit above ground. Okay? All right, so when we are adding rational numbers, integers, with different signs, meaning one is positive and one is negative, the rule is different. Okay, we do not add the absolute values like we did before. We actually have to subtract the absolute values. And then we keep the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value. So that's it's a lot of words, it's a tricky thing to remember. Let me first do it so we see what the process is. And then we'll talk about why it works. All right, so to do this, we need to subtract the absolute values of the numbers. Okay, so we have to figure out the absolute value of negative 1, that is positive 1. And then the absolute value of positive 2 is positive 2. So we found the absolute values of the numbers. Now let's subtract them. So we're going to do 2 minus 1. 2 minus 1 is 1. Okay, and then we're told to keep the sign, meaning positive or negative sign, of the number with the greatest absolute value. Okay, so looking at negative 1 and 2, which one has the biggest absolute value? Is 1 bigger than 2 or is 2 bigger than 1? 2 is bigger than 1, so 2 has the greatest absolute value. And in this case, 2 is positive. So that's why we're going to end up with the answer that negative 1 plus 2 is equal to positive 1. Now, why does this work? What does that mean? How does any of this connect to absolute value? Well, what absolute value means is our distance from 0. So if I go back to my horizontal number line here, I have this negative 1, this arrow. That means my distance from 0 is 1 in the negative direction. Okay, and then I have 2. This is an arrow that's moving 2 to the right. So it's 2 in the positive direction. Okay, but when I combine them, those are going in different directions. It's going negative 1 to the left, and then we have to add 2, so we end up moving 1, 2 to the right. Okay, so what that means is I go negative 1 plus 1, and I get back to 0. So that work that I just did there didn't matter. It went away. Like this is being subtracted away, and all I'm left with is that difference between the absolute value. The difference between the absolute value here is 1, right? So that's what I see left in my picture. It's an arrow that's going 1, and here it's going 1 to the right because the absolute value of 2 was bigger, right? So for our final example, we're again going to be adding 1 positive and 1 negative number. Here we have positive 15 plus negative 32. So here we have 1 positive and 1 negative. So we are adding rational numbers with different signs. And when we do that, we subtract the absolute values of the numbers and then keep the sign with the greatest absolute value. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, let's figure out the absolute value of my 2 numbers. All right, so what is the absolute value of 15? The absolute value of 15 is 15. And then what's the absolute value of negative 32? Positive 32 as well. So we have found the absolute values. Then we need to subtract the absolute values. You have to do 32 minus 15. Okay, quick review how we do this. We're going to need to do some borrowing. So we look at our 1s and we try to do 2 minus 5. Okay, we can't do 2 minus 5. Actually, what we're learning now is telling us you can do 2 minus 5. You're going to get a negative number, but that's not really how the algorithm works. So we have to borrow from the 3. So you cross out the 3, change it to a 2, and carry a 1. Well, you're really carrying a 10 from the tens place. Okay, so we turn that 2 into a 12. And then we do 12 minus 5. 12 minus 5 is 7. All right, and then I have 2 minus 1. 2 minus 1 is 17. When I do 32 minus 15, you get 17. So then, all right, what's going to be our answer here? So we subtracted the absolute values of the numbers. Cool. And then we need to keep the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value. So if I look at 15 and negative 32, which one had a bigger absolute value? Okay, so that means that the answer to this question is going to be negative 17. Okay, so 15 plus negative 32 is negative 17. All right, good job, everyone.